So I got up today, I left the apartment. I had two things planned. I was really just going to go out and run an errand. Wanted to get a coffee and 2 media lunas for breakfast. And I also wanted to go to a store and buy some vitamins because I ran out. And that was the plan. But right when I came around the corner outside the apartment, I saw a bus stopped at the corner. And the bus said it was going to Godoy Cruz. And it was a town that's, like a suburb of Mendoza, I guess. Could be considered a suburb of Mendoza. Although, population-wise, it's about the same size as Mendoza. So, it is its own city for sure. And I've been wanting to go there. I don't know much about it. And I just, on a whim, decided I would hop on that bus. So I did. And now we're here in Godoy Cruz, in the plaza. See, Plaza Godoy Cruz. It's actually a statue of Dr. Tomas Godoy Cruz in the middle of the plaza, I think, that they named the town after this guy. It wasn't always called Godoy Cruz. Like I said, I don't know. I didn't know too much about it, but I did go to a little cafe over on the plaza here, and while I was having breakfast, I was reading on my phone about more about Godoy Cruz, so I knew a little bit more about it. And this statue here, I guess. We're coming up on the backside. There's Dr. Godoy Cruz's butt. I've mentioned historical people's butts more than a few times in videos. I wonder if that means something. La Municipalidad y Pueblo de Godoy Cruz, al General José de San Martín. So there he is, Dr. Tomas Godoy Cruz. So they named the town after this guy. And one of the interesting things that's in this town that I noticed while I was doing a little research, like I said, while I was having my breakfast, it's right over here on the other side of the square. There is what is the former site of the police station. It's an old police station, the 7th District, I think, police station it was called. Anyway, sounds like just a normal thing. Oh yeah, it's a police station, no big deal, right? Well, this police station, during the Military Junta, the national reorganization process, in between 1976 and 1983, that's the Military Junta that we talked a good deal about in our video on Las Malvinas that we shot outside of Cordoba. Link to that in the description, by the way. But this was a clandestine secret police center where people were tortured and interrogated and murdered and disappeared, which is terrifying, but it happened. And the building is right over there across the street, just past those trees. And out in front, you can see there's let's see, once this bus passes by, I'll zoom in. You can see over the doorway there's like a banner. And that banner's there. Well, caught it just before the truck went through. The banner is there because this has been converted into a museum. It's a museum of memory, a museum to remember the crimes of the military junta and the victims of those crimes. And there are museums like this actually in places all around Argentina. There was one in Cordoba, and I actually really wanted to go to that one. It's right in the center, right next to the cathedral, and I really wanted to go, but it was closed the entire time I was there, and it's going to remain closed up through February, I guess. So unfortunately we weren't able to go there and see that, but I think I do want to go see this one, and it looks like it's open. I see people going in and out, and we can talk. I want to go in and take a look, and then we can talk more about the military junta, the national reorganization process, Procesa Nacional, no, Proceso de Reorganización Nacional. That's what the military junta was called officially, which sounds like such a benign name, National Reorganization Process. But, for almost a decade, from 76 until up through 83, they were in charge of the country, and they were basically committing, a genocide against people here in Argentina. And it's really, really complicated for me as someone from the United States because the military junta was supported explicitly by the United States, both publicly and privately. So it's a very conflicting subject for me, knowing that the United States, that my country, the government of my country, played such an important role in supporting what was a really horrible administration here that was committing war crimes against its people. So anyway, on that note, I think I'm going to go across the street and take a look inside this museum. And then maybe afterwards we can talk a little bit more about the history around the military junta and its effects on Argentina to this day. Out here in front, before you go in, you can see the sign here. It says Memoria, Verdad, Justicia, Democracia, which is memory, truth, justice, and democracy. And the banner that we saw over the door actually says hashtag 40 Democracia, 40 years of democracy in Argentina. This is the official name here of the museum, Casa de la Cultura y la Memoria Godoy Cruz. Anyway, the banner over here, 40 years of democracy, it's really an important thing. The junta that controlled the country between 76 and 83 was actually definitely not the first military junta that controlled the country. And in the 20th century, and even before, Argentina has had a history of going back and forth in a cycle between democracy and military coup. And so having 40 years of democracy is a really, really big accomplishment for Argentina because of that history. So when I see a sign like that and I see a museum like this, the whole point of the museum is so that younger generations can learn about the crimes and the horrors under the military junta, and realize that that the 40 years of democracy, that democracy is a very important thing here, and that it should never be discounted, and that the horrible things that happened under the junta will not be forgotten by future generations, so they won't stumble back into that cycle of democracy and military coups. I think it's a really important thing. So, right when you come in, there are these three signs explaining what the museum is and what it used to be, and how it came to be. Like I said, it used to be the police station. That was a clandestine location for the secret police. You can take a look at all three of these, and at this point I'm going to pause and we'll do a translation of all of this because it's really important. Normally I just skip past stuff that's in Spanish because I don't understand most of it, but this is all really important to translate. The signs read, "During the last military regime, passing through police stations was part of the route followed by detained and disappeared. The Sectional Police Station 7 of Godoy Cruz was part of the organizational chart of the repression that the army mounted throughout the country. A clandestine detention, torture, and extermination center operated here in the period from 1975 to 1983. The testimonial, reconstruction, and investigations demonstrated that this building is, in itself, a living testimony of one of the most cruel, bloodthirsty, and violent times it went through, Mendoza, in the context of the dictatorship. This place was used to illegitimately deprive people of their freedom and torture them. Many of those who passed through here are still missing. It was marked for the first time on March 24th, 2011, by the municipality of Godoy Cruz, in an event in which human rights leaders, former political prisoners, mothers of Plaza de Mayo, and Hijos, which is a group that stands for Sons and Daughters for Identity and Justice Against Forgetfulness and Silence, participated. The signage was made 35 years after the coup, but it was at the forefront since, for the first time in the province, the horrors committed during the de facto government in the clandestine detention centers were indicated with a plaque. In 2019, the municipality recovered this space to keep the memory alive. On March 24, 1976, a military junta led by Jorge Rafael Videla, General Commander of the Army, overthrew Maria Estela Martinez de Perón. From then on, a dictatorship was established under the name National Reorganization Process. The following members were part of the board: Emilio Mesera, Commander General of the Navy; Orlando Agosti, Commander General of the Air Force. Although between 1930 and 1966 there were 5 coups d'etat in Argentina, none of those processes was as repressive as this last one. It is estimated that 30,000 people were missing. The National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons was created in 1983 to investigate the events that occurred during the dictatorship. Their conclusions gave rise to Never Again, published in September 1984. On the walls in here, they have pictures and names of victims. And now, of course, these are only some of the victims. I imagine these are like some of the most well-known people who were, well-known scholars, authors, because the total number of victims is in, around 30,000, maybe even more. And that's the thing, is you don't really know how many victims there actually are, because a lot of the victims were simply disappeared. Here's a sculpture. This is a really powerful sculpture. Jeez. Missing body parts replaced with others. The sculpture's powerful because, like I said, people were just disappeared, never to be seen, never to be heard from again. Their families don't know what happened to them. There are also cases of after people were disappeared, their children, especially if their children were young enough to not remember them, would be taken, given new names, and put up for adoption, adopted into other families without ever knowing that their parents and their actual blood family ever existed. It's really sickening, but it happened. And like I said, I think this museum and museums like this are really important, because if enough time passes and everybody who actually lived through it passes away and there's no memory of it, then there's a much greater possibility that something like this would happen again. And I think that's why they made this museum, for sure, and also why it's so important that they did. Another sculpture in the center of this room. And now these sculptures, it looks like they're all in the same style. And I wonder if they're the same artist. This is Eliana Molinelli. Eliana Molinelli was a renowned Argentine sculptor whose works are actually in places all over Argentina, especially in Mendoza. She's been exhibited all over the world. She was the vice dean and director of the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Cuyo. And in Plaza Independencia, the central plaza of Mendoza, there is a large set of sculpted murals which she created. I'm going to check the other one here and see if it's the same artist. I don't see a tag on this one, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the same artist. Maybe there's someone in the comments who knows whether these sculptures are all the same artist. They look very similar, so it would make sense that they are. A large list of writers and journalists who were victims of the dictatorship. Okay, so that would make more sense. These are writers, journalists, likely people who opposed, spoke out publicly against the dictatorship, spoke out publicly against the junta and their crimes. I'm going to close this window real quick because I want to read this sign. Authoritarian governments are enemies of culture. They deny any expression that delegitimizes their power. They deny its existence or, when they can, use it for their own objectives, turning it into propaganda. When you denounce them, they try to crush it, or try to distort its purposes and content. The dictatorship, suffered between 1976 and 1983, was no exception to this dark rule, and in all areas, the military persecuted and censored dissident expressions through a complex, repressive, and criminal apparatus. From the military perspective, culture had to be subordinated to essential values to guard against ideological infiltration. Military practice subscribed to a traditionalist and conservative conception that considered the cultural system should fulfill the mission of strengthening the moral values and make them national values. They thus prevented culture from being used to provoke deviations and agitate values associated with atheism or Marxism. This conception reflected the firmness with which repression was developed in the cultural field. During the dictatorship, songs appeared that pretended to be innocent. However, they were strong demands and deep reflections on the suffocation caused by the lack of freedom. Hidden under the apparently simple stories, their lyrics narrated an entire meaningless universe and portrayed the current events of that time. In this period, the musicians were committed to the social and political reality of denunciation or resistance. Groups and soloists from the rock and popular song circuit were banned and persecuted for years. Totalitarianism harassed and persecuted musicians. Repression was unleashed not only on recitals, but on anyone who imitated the styles and behaviors of the band artists. However, music remained alive during those hard years and slowly became one of the privileged areas of protest. It was the place where young people found refuge and the space to express their discontent. The lyrics, with their double meanings, their metaphors and allegories, served to denounce. Soon the composers became influential and inspiring. Paradoxically, close to the return of democracy and in the midst of the conflict over the Malvinas, the dictatorship allowed national rock to spread massively. The 1982 war produced a nationalist and anti-English surge in society that allowed young rockers to make their songs official. This movement, which had been beaten and persecuted for years, achieved great prominence like never before. National rock would take advantage of the space granted on the radio to spread covert criticism of an illegitimate government. This looks like a timeline of the dictatorship. Yeah, this is 24th of March. This is when they took over. This is the beginning of the coup, 24th of March, 1976. And the Maria Estela Martinez de Perón, that's Isabel Perón. Her nickname was Isabel. That's the name she went by. And that is Juan Perón's third wife, and also was his vice president. So when he died, and she took over, it created sort of a power vacuum because Juan Perón like I've said in some previous videos, he was a populist, and he has been portrayed, of course, as like a leftist communist, or at least that's the way he was portrayed during in the United States during the 70s. And one of the reasons why the United States supported the Military Junta was because they were anti-Peronist, and basically anything that was seen in the United States that was seen as even being somewhat related to communism during the 70s and the 80s was actively opposed by the United States. So they supported brutal military dictatorship because that dictatorship was anti-Peronist, or was seen as being anti-communist in the United States. But Juan Perón was actually paying on. He was essentially had patrons from all over the political spectrum: left-wing, right-wing, business leaders, unions, all over the place, basically to try and maintain power. When Perón died and Isabel Perón took over, she just wasn't able to hold it all together, all those factions, and the economy was not doing well. The global economy in the late 70s was not doing well, and it definitely affected Argentina, and it left an opportunity for a military junta to take over. And the military junta that took over was supported largely by business interests, capitalist business interests, especially like what would be considered now neoliberal business interests, and also social conservatives. Here, there's the Pope, Juan Pablo II, Pope John Paul II. Now, in the 70s, in South America, almost all of the governments were right-wing military juntas. They were supported largely across the board by the United States. And Argentina, before the coup, was one of the last actual democracies. And even though it wasn't really functioning very well, the government was having a lot of trouble for sure. The economy, it was one of the last democracies. And when that democracy fell and the junta took over, basically all of South America was controlled by military dictatorships. This is at the end, after the Malvinas conflict that we talked about in our video, our last video, or one of our last videos there in Cordoba. The military junta, which was controlled by the three heads of the three forces of the three armed forces, right? The Navy, Air Force, and Army. There was a lot of infighting, and their grip on power just was already pretty weak going into the conflict, and it only got worse afterwards. And here, in 1983, they handed over power. You can see here, return to elections, and the mark of democracy in 10th of December. Raúl Alfonsín was the president elected. And so the 10th of December is remembered in Argentina as the day of the return of democracy, and it's the day where they inaugurate the president. So Javier Milei, who was recently inaugurated as the new president, inaugurated on December 10th for that reason, because it's the day that democracy returned to Argentina. There's another sculpture in the middle of this room. We've been sort of walking around in a large cardboard cutout that says Nunca Más, which means never again. This, Eliana Molinelli, same artist. I imagine that first sculpture we saw is the same artist as well. So this, if I understand correctly, disappeared militants were direct victims of terrorism of the state. La Justicia, the justice, never demonstrated that they were culpable of anything. So I guess this is saying like no se puede asociar con, because like that they were never actually it was never actually demonstrated that they committed crimes. They were basically just because they were associated with certain beliefs, like anti-government beliefs, or maybe like, let's see, because they also participated in internal commissions or fábricas o delegados sindicales, like unions, labor unions. So really, I guess it was just, it's their beliefs that they had. They opposed the government. They were part of labor unions. There were students, professionals, docentes, I don't know, escritores, writers, journalists, actors, artists, and religious members. Basically anyone who opposed the dictatorship with no actual crimes committed, never proven that they committed a crime. But they were just, they were opposed. They were opposed to the junta, and that was enough. The other room had names next to everybody. And this room is almost more powerful because there are no names next to everybody. It's just some person who was opposed to the government, her and him. And for whatever reason, they lost their lives. And maybe even worse. I mean, it's one thing to lose your life over your beliefs. It's another thing to lose your life and have your entire identity erased. You get disappeared. Your kids get it. Some other family adopts your kids and they lose their name and their history. It's really terrible. It's a really powerful museum. I mean, it's very small. Like I said, it's really just that floor. That first floor, those few rooms that we saw. And just a few plaques explaining and pictures. Just pictures of the victims. That last room we were in, that was the most powerful. Because the one that had the names, those are probably figures that are, journalists, writers, well-known people whose deaths at the hands of the junta were well publicized, and maybe not at the time, maybe at the time, I don't know, but that room, man, with just the faces of people, just you don't even know who they are, you don't know their names, but their faces are there, and you know what happened to them. It's really, really, I don't know, it's really powerful. It just makes you, I don't know, it really hits home. And like I said, that's the whole point of that museum. The whole point is to make sure that people don't forget. And people don't forget what happened, why it happened, and to make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. And that's it's a really slippery slope. These are the same reasons why, for example, Holocaust museums exist all over the world. It's for remembrance. It's to make sure that everybody remembers exactly what happened, and that it's not sort of just lost. Well, a century later, nobody really remembers, because everybody who actually lived through it they're all dead. But, and like I said before we went in the museum, I feel weird as an American. I feel really weird about it, because it's very unsettling knowing that your government played such a large role in supporting this horrible dictatorship, and not just in Argentina, like in countries all across Latin America, because as bad as it was in Argentina, you could probably have, and there may actually be, museums like this in other countries, in Chile, Pinochet in Chile, and other countries where the United States also supported military dictatorships, because during the Cold War, like I said, any government, democratically elected or not, that even leaned left and seemed like it was a leftist or communist government was immediately like the enemy of the United States during that time. And I don't know. It's one thing to know the history, and I think, as you grow older, when you're a little kid, you learn about the history of your country, and I feel like this is probably honestly the same for a lot of countries, not just the United States, but you learn about the history of your country. You only learn about the good stuff. You learn about basically the myth of the history of your country when you're younger. And a lot of the times when you get out of primary school and maybe high school, if you don't continue to study and look deeper into the history, you don't continue to study history, you just sort of go along with that history that you learn, the sugar-coated good history that focuses on the good things and leaves out the bad things, and whitewashes away a lot of the really horrible things that happened. And if you don't continue really looking into it, you don't really learn the reality of the situation. And I think that's especially true in the United States. It's different in a lot of countries. A lot of other countries, I know in some countries they, this is not to say that it is always the same in the United States. In the United States, there has been a concerted effort to try and teach about to try and teach kids in school about the bad parts of the history in the United States. That effort has started to be rescinded in a lot of places in the United States, and that actually scares the shit out of me. But I don't know. This is a whole rant that I didn't think I was going to go down, a whole rabbit hole that I didn't think I was going to go down today when we just decided to hop on a bus and go to Godoy Cruz. I don't know. I will say I think it's important to acknowledge everything about your history, the history of your country, and the history, not to say that you, person today, who had nothing to do with the horrible things in the history of your country, it's not your fault that these things happened, but it is important to recognize that they happened, and they were perpetrated by, previous governments of your country, and potentially your ancestors. It's something really important to remember. You can't lay blame for these past actions on the present population of a country, but you also have to recognize that these things happened, and never forget that they happened, and never try to to sugarcoat it or make it look like they weren't horrible things when they really were. It's interesting. I mentioned in there December 10th. It's the inauguration day here in Argentina, the day that democracy returned, right? December 10th, 1983. So every presidential election, they inaugurate the president on December 10th in order to honor the day that democracy came back. And Milei, his vice president, Victoria Rural, I think her name is. She was in the news recently. Some statements she's made, some pretty controversial statements that have seemed to sort of to downplay the atrocities that the military junta perpetrated, and she's almost been seen by some people as like an apologist for the military regime, which is kind of scary, honestly. When you see stuff like that, when you know that that these things happened, and you see someone 40 years later trying to make it out like it's not as bad as everybody really thought it was, that's a slippery slope. And I'm an outsider here in Argentina. I just see things from an outsider point of view, and I'm not involved directly, at all in politics in Argentina. I can't vote here. I don't live here. I don't, I'm just visiting. But to see something like that is very unsettling, and I really do hope that that the country doesn't head back in that direction. And I really do hope that museums like this one, that they continue to stay open, that people continue to keep going to them, and that the message of that they're putting out there of the horrors of the military junta, the dictatorship, and how those always have to be remembered so that we never end up back in that situation again. I think that's really important. And I think here in Argentina it's specifically important because, like I said before, the fall of the military junta in 1983, there was a cycle going back and forth between democracy and coup, over and over and over for 100 years, maybe even longer. And to have a stable democracy for 40 years, it's an accomplishment that is, it seems, the downside of it is it seems like, democracy's always going to be around because, look, we've had it for 40 years. It's something that we're grappling with in the United States right now, too. The idea that, we're a democratic country and democracy will always be around and we'll always be a democratic country, and there's no way we can't be one, so we don't have to actively worry about anyone who is attempting to to sort of weaken the system of democracy. And that's a trap. That's a trap that you can fall into. And I think museums like this, their goal obviously is to prevent people from falling into that trap. And I think this one does a really good job. Anyway, I think I've ranted long enough about this subject. Yeah. I don't really want this to be the only video I make about Godoy Cruz, because looking around the plaza here, it seems like a really nice city. And I think I'm going to do a little more exploring of Godoy Cruz while we are here in Mendoza. And maybe make another video about some of the things of Godoy Cruz that are a little happier. But that museum really piqued my interest. And the fact that they took what used to be a clandestine secret police center where people were tortured and disappeared, and they turned it into a museum of remembrance, I think is really powerful. And I couldn't, when I was sitting in the cafe across the street from that place, I couldn't just skip it. I couldn't just, walk past it and not go in and not film what's in there, because it's really important, and I think it's something that should be documented, and people should know about it. So if you're ever in Godoy Cruz, down here south of Mendoza, about 20 minutes or so south of Mendoza, definitely go to that place. Go in there. Look at those photos. Look at the photos of the people in that room, and recognize that it wasn't that long ago that all this was happening, and it definitely doesn't take much for stuff like that to start happening again. Anyway, even though this video was a bit of a downer, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.